want to thank everybody for being here. I'm Ted Dintersmith. This shows some of my work. So I did a film with Greg Whiteley, who's a San Diego native, but anyway, Most Likely to Succeed. How many of you have seen that? Awesome. So then I wrote a book with Tony Wagner, and I have which I'm going to be shamelessly self-promoting, a book called What School Could Be. I want to explain why I'm here. And my path, I spent my career in technology innovation. And if you went back 10 years ago, I thought I was about to retire and just have fun. You know, my wife and I like to travel. My work in technology had gone reasonably well. And so I had no idea that I'd be doing to my body what I do to my body today. But I connected some dots that sort of had emerged slowly and then got brought into focus sharply. And when I connected those dots, I reached a conclusion that I think is sobering, which is I started saying to friends 6, 7, 8 years ago that if we don't rethink what we do with our kids in school, I'm not convinced our democracy will survive. And I have to be honest, when I said this in 2010, 2011, 2012, I just knew, nobody wanted to talk to me. I'd go to a cocktail party and I'd always have about a 10-foot diameter around me where nobody would be there. Even my wife would say, Ted, I think you've gone a little bit off the guard. Maybe you should go back to work. And but let me explain why I reached that conclusion, because it's really the intersection of innovation and the root cause around education that I think few people understand. So for years in innovation, and I was a venture capitalist, I backed a lot of things. I kind of thought innovation was an unambiguous good thing. It was doing all these great things, making us more productive, bringing us great entertainment, communications capabilities. It was a tide lifting all boats. But over time, I began to see the dark side of innovation in that as we backed companies that made some people a lot more productive, I'll answer, you want me to answer that? So, that we were, many of the businesses we backed said our goal is to bring radical productivity advantages to our target industry. And what I realized over time was that a company's productivity advantage was a worker's unemployment slip. And so these advances, which are serious and real, were marginalizing millions of people, were laying off people, were applying downward pressure to wage levels. And that wasn't a few jobs. That wasn't tens of jobs or hundreds of jobs. This was millions of jobs. The second thing, and I think we see this in spades now, but the potential that technology has to disrupt our ability to be informed, responsible citizens. And so I go back, I was born, this will date me, but when in the world of Walter Cronkite, there were a handful of trusted news services that really did their best to be objective. And we would watch them and we'd have disagreements, but there would be a common agreement about what truth was. And as I started to think about the history of companies we had backed, the companies I had been involved with or my partners had funded, I began to feel like what happens when millions of people are cut loose? What happens when it becomes really easy to manipulate and mobilize millions of people on causes that aren't legitimate? And here's the thing that I think I had some differential advantage in understanding that is largely lost, is that technology is on an exponential growth curve. So I won't bother, but I ask large audiences, I'll say this, it doubles every 2 years, where will it be in 10? I've asked at least thousands of people that question, and nobody can ever tell me the answer. And I always joke back, think about all the combined years of math we have in this room, and people can't answer a simple question about exponential growth. But here's what we need to understand. If it's doubling every 2 years, which is done for 5 decades, the price performance of technology in your pocket will be 32 times as powerful in 10 years as it is today. That means 32 times as much disruption as what we just went through in the last 10 years, when 10 years ago was the very beginning of the smartphone. Then I ask audiences, where will it be in 20 years? Some will actually raise their hand and say 64, which of course is wrong. If it's 32 in 10 years, it's 32 squared, or over 1,000 times, 3 orders of magnitude disruption by the time kindergarten kids are out of school into the workplace. And so if we don't all pay an enormous amount of attention to the very real prospect that we're going to live in a world where 50, 100 million adults in our country are marginalized, unemployed, and on the sidelines, if that doesn't get our attention, what will? My primary residence is Charlottesville, Virginia. So I know what happens when angry people, heavily armed, decide to descend on a community. And so and I know you're laughing, but it's not laughable. I mean, this is what happens when people feel marginalized and adrift, when they feel there's no way for them to plug into their world and make it better. School. Let me take a run at what's going on in school. Is that for a long time, I just sort of trusted the system to be doing basically good things for kids. And over time, with a few schools and then more schools and more schools, I began to feel like there were serious issues. And what the perspective I had on it was the perspective of somebody who had lived and breathed innovation. And so I knew what kinds of people. I see one of the people I had a great honor to work with, Adam Enbar here. But the people that do really well in a dynamic, agile, innovative world are people that think outside the box, that are fearless, that don't even blink about the possibility of failure, that ask a million questions, that are just insatiable in terms of their curiosity. And I wasn't seeing that in a lot of the schools I visited. And then as I began to visit more schools, talk to people, interview people, I came to this conclusion about school, that to do really well in school, if you can excel at these things, memorizing content, replicating low-level procedures, writing formulaically, and following instructions, you will be on the honor roll. You might be valedictorian. You will get into a top college. You will go to college. If you can do those same 4 things in college, often you will do really well in your introductory courses. You may finally start to stumble in the higher level courses that are more demanding, but those characteristics will take you a long way in school. What's the problem? Those are the exact things that machine intelligence excels at. And so if, in fact, and I saw this in my career in venture capital, is for years I used to gravitate toward the academic superstars. And with a top-tier firm, we had our pick. I had breakfast one time with somebody and I said, Exeter, Princeton, Harvard Business School, which was, of course, her exact background, which wasn't great when I said that they often struggle and are really uncomfortable in a world that's full of ambiguity with real risk of failure. And so I started to say, what if even our academic superstars aren't geared up and prepared for success, what does that mean? The thing that really caused me to worry is the prevailing view. So I'm at the right conference to make these points because so many people in our country to this day believe a few things. They believe we need to get test scores up. We just had the latest round of NAEP scores, right? Where on a base of 250 points, a 2 or 3 point swing on a very lightly sampled set of students is somehow blown up as being a major indicator of education success or failure. We need to get more kids into college, which means more college-ready content. And because we can anecdotally point to some charter schools, people say, oh, I heard of this charter school, better test scores, more kids into college. So that's the mantra, that's the Kool-Aid we often drink, and there's a lot of that Kool-Aid being served here. So higher test scores, more rigorous college-ready content, more kids graduating from high school and on to college. And my challenge back to people who believe that is that I believe you are only increasing the likelihood of the collapse of our democracy. And why do I say that? First, I say start, before you buy into the importance of test scores, go online and take some of those practice questions. Ask yourself, is this an important competence in life? Particularly look at the state-driven tests. States are thinly budgeted for that, and they have to administer these tests in bulk. And so when I go look at these state-driven tests, I get very concerned about the fact that that's being used to determine the success of teachers and success of schools. And what I'm saying, by the way, is no secret to teachers. No secret. They understand this. When you look at the mantra around college ready, I always encourage people, go look at what kids are studying in grades 7 through 12. Ask yourself how often you use that as an adult. And the answer is very little. If you're lucky, you're in a school that has you writing a fair amount. But that's actually a fairly small number of schools. And a lot of it is filled up with OPSIT and IBIT. We teach kids the Chicago style versus MSL footnotes, but we don't teach them how to fact check. We teach kids how to do factor polynomials of the quadratic equation. We never quite have time to teach a kid how to apply and use math. And so when kids are betting on that, when we have made college ready the all-in focus of our K through 12 schools, fast forward to what happens when they graduate from high school, the 80% that do. I call it the college or Chipotle choice. So you have no distinctive proficiency. You have no skill of consequence. You had no space in those years to get good at something you care about. And so you can either go on to a four-year college or take a 30-hour-a-week minimum wage job that increasingly, by the way, go to college graduates. Boom. And so you look at that and start to say, now, let's celebrate our success because we do get these kids into college. I don't know how familiar you are with the math on that, the economics. Of every 100 kids that start down the four-year college path, about 50 graduate in a meaningful time period, 6 years or less. Of those 50 that graduate, 25 get the kind of job we associate with a college degree. So out of the 100 that start, 25 have the outcome we assume is 100% the likelihood or the case for a college education. Out of those 100 that start, 70 end up with substantial student loan debt, an average of $43,000 a year. And lost in the shuffle, what the statisticians never really include in their analysis is all the kids that are told in high school, day in and day out, that if you don't go to college, you're a failure. And as I travel and I visit these schools, I can guarantee you, you can go to the bank on this. You go to a low-income high school, every square inch of hall space will have college pennants and posters that say, if you don't go to college, you're not a success. Many of these high schools insist on a college acceptance letter as a requirement for graduation. The kids believe that. We don't teach financial literacy brilliantly. They go off to these colleges, they sign papers, they drop out after 2 or 3 years, they have 30, 40, 50K of student loan debt. And so you look at this and you say, how does this play out? All the routine jobs being gobbled up by machine intelligence. Kids betting that their education will open doors for them, and many, many, many of them leaving with very few career prospects. And even the winners in college, honestly, the mental health statistics are dismal. It's 35% report feeling depressed to the point of not being able to get out of bed. And so you look at this picture and you say, we need to step back and rethink things radically. And it's one of the challenges for me coming to a conference like this where 9 out of the 10 rooms I go to are going to have somebody up there saying, better test scores, more college-ready, rigorous content, and more kids into college, and isn't this a terrific thing? So when you think the future of democracy is on the line, you do unusual things. And so as I began to feel this was a really critical issue, I started by saying, how do you change people's thinking? And I don't believe logic does it. I mean, I hope my talk helps a little, but I felt like the way you're going to change people's thinking is emotionally. And so I had the idea of doing a film. I did a 6-month search. I found this incredible documentarian, Greg Whiteley, and I just worked closely with him. I fully funded the film. He produced the film Most Likely to Succeed. We ran the table when it comes to film festivals, Sundance, AFI, Tribeca, 30 major film festivals. I made a decision people criticized me for. To this day, I turned down Netflix and the online groups. I said, I want this film to be screened by communities as a group and bring people together for thoughtful discussion, something we have so little of today in society. We've done over 5,000 community screenings with this film, 35 countries. I'm going, finally, they wore me down, I'm going to China in June for 2 weeks because in China, they're regularly doing online events with the film and having 25,000 people sign up and watch this film online. As I traveled with the film and talked to people, a question that got raised, there were a couple questions that got raised. One was, okay, this was a school started from scratch. How do you change an existing school? And that's a very fair and important question because it's actually, anything in education is hard. Starting a school is hard. But it's so much easier to do something innovative when it's brand new. When I see initiatives that say we're going to fund 10 new schools with $10 million, I just scratch my head and say, why are you focusing on such an irrelevant problem? We can start brand new schools with lots of money. That is not the problem in America today. The problem in America today is 137,000 schools, and how do we empower, encourage, and support them to make progress? So I said, I need to know more. And I did not want to be one of those asshole business guys who just didn't do any homework and just sort of threw ideas out across the transom. So I had this idea of taking a big trip. And so in this fall of 2015, I spent the entire school year, I traveled every single school day from second week of September through the middle of June. I took it really seriously. I hired the advanced campaign planning team for a presidential candidate, Romney's team, to plan every single day. And I did that because I wanted to get a lot out of it. I wanted to meet as many people as I could in the course of 9 intensive months. And so every day, 7:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night was cram jam with things. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it'd be interesting. I thought I might learn something. And as a trip, I had no idea that I would do anything with it. I mean, I didn't, I just thought I'm going to do this. And as I got toward the end of the trip, I was just so blown away. I never got tired because each day I was meeting these incredible people fighting for their kids. And those incredible people were teachers. And so many, I feel so bad that so many business people dump on our teachers when they're actually the daily heroes. And you look at teachers and they're held accountable to these state-driven tests or these, David Coleman's college-ready criteria. They're not able to engage with their students on things students care about, where we can explain why this is going to help them in life. And they're trying to keep these kids focused on something that the kids sort of ask, when am I ever going to use it? And the honest answer is probably not. And so as I started doing that, wrote this book, I think this would be a good time. Let's show the book trailer.
Attention passengers traveling on United Airlines Flight 687 to Chicago. Please proceed to gate 61. Your flight is now boarding.
So the book, thanks. I mean, somebody probably will tell other people this, but I'll be honest with you. I actually wrote the book twice. So the first one I threw out. And because the first one I just sort of wrote kind of as I went. And that turned out not to be a very interesting book. But it was a useful exercise because I stepped back and say, what did I really learn from this? It wasn't about me and where I went. It was about what I saw and observed. And so I include things from kindergarten teachers in Fort Wayne. These are not, see, I self-funded the whole thing. A lot of people who speak or write books go for where the fees are, and the fees are where the rich kids are. I went where the kids are. I went to rural. I spent a lot of time in rural America. 1/3 of kids in America are in rural communities. They get very little attention. I was a lot in inner cities. I spent 3 days in tribal villages in western Alaska that have no roads. And I just sort of looked and talked and just took it all in. And I have to say, I have a lot of faith and conviction that under the right circumstances and conditions, our teachers have so much pent-up innovation. It's not every teacher, but so many will. And when some see teachers racing ahead and they're not getting wailed on, others will fall in and do it. And so out of this, I sort of began to piece together a sense of how we might make some real changes that are supported, encouraged, and guided from the top, but not driven, mandated, not central planning from the Soviet Union model, but in bright, alert, informed, supportive leaders putting in place the conditions to let teachers do what they entered the profession to do, which ultimately is to engage and inspire their kids. And that's what they want to do. They don't want to be teaching kids and holding them accountable to these tests. But if that's what's in the newspaper, if that's what Arne Duncan says is the accountability standard, it's very difficult for the teacher to depart from that. But when you see these stories, and every single time I ask these teachers, how could they do it? What happened? They said, my principal had my back. My superintendent said, I'm standing behind you. But it goes from individual classrooms, and as I say, I talk about amazing teachers doing extraordinary things in ordinary circumstances, because these are blue-collar, hard-scrabble places. But also you start to see these visionary education leaders and how they transform schools at scale in a way that trusted and empowered their teachers. I write a lot about what was a really remarkable 8-year experience in New Hampshire, where Ginny Berry, with support from Maggie Hassan, put in place the conditions but trusted teachers to lead the way, to design their own next generation assessments framework. And you just sort of see from the classroom all the way up to a state level the most incredible things. And so I'm going to beg you, you all have social media, I need your help on this book. It's gotten off to a great start. It's the #1 new release from Amazon. I had the publisher double the initial print run. Most of that's already been sold, and it was only released 5 days ago. But then I want to add one more thing on this, is that after the trip, I said, what would be a good thing to do next? And as I traveled, for various reasons, some of it serendipity, some of it not, I sort of latched on to 2 states. And so, you remember my friends who cleared out the circle around me? So I have been to North Dakota 11 times in the last 2.5 years. I've been to, now this one doesn't sound as much hard duty. I've been to Hawaii 7 times. But they're very different states, red and rural, blue, a lot of urban, but acute pockets of poverty. And working with people there, from the governor to the commissioner of education to the school board, business community, but closely, and supporting as best I can the classroom teachers and the people that surround and support them. And you would have to be with, I was in Bismarck Saturday. I lose track of time. But there is so much energy there, and all these teachers are just, because our mantra, and I have this on our website in terms of the support, is teacher-driven, empowered and trusted, small steps lead to big change, and to try to offer helpful resources if in fact you find it useful. And we're finding, we've got a big Innovation Education Summit in June, the second one in North Dakota. We've got teachers from all over the state so anxious to share their own innovations. And what I find so interesting is I visit places, I'll sit down with superintendent of a district. I'll say, I'm really curious, what are you doing that's really innovative here? And they'll often say, oh, I'm not sure we're doing that. We're thinking about it, but I'm not sure we're doing that much. And then an hour later, they will have mentioned 3 or 4 amazing things they've done. But I'll say to them, if it's not first and foremost on your mind, it's not going to be first and foremost on the minds of your teachers and your principals and your parents and your school board. And so what I deeply believe is that it's there. A friend of mine sent me an email 2 weeks ago and said, I think it's quite possible the dam is about to break. And I believe that. I see it when I go. People have sort of run out of steam and energy on the reform agenda. We've now had 15 years of flat NAEP score. We picked the wrong goal, and we've made no progress on the wrong goal. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. And I think people are sort of saying, okay, we can do better. And when you start to see kids doing, somebody introduced me 2 weeks ago. They said, and I think their adjective was that I was distinctive in saying that I advocate for trusting teachers, for restoring a sense of purpose in what our schools do, for when we insist the kids are good in something, we can explain why it's useful later in life, and that when they take on something, they really and truly learn it instead of just bullshit their way through some exam. And I got up and I said, why should that be distinctive? I mean, why isn't that what we want to do in our schools? And so I do need your help. I've got a book signing at 4 o'clock, but I've got these buttons in the back. This is the perfect place because if in fact democracy is on the line, if we move slowly on this and machine intelligence races ahead and China doesn't futz around, and we continue to say this is something we ought to think about doing, instead of really restoring authenticity to the learning experiences of our kids, instead of letting teachers do what they entered the profession to do, if that happens, our democracy won't survive. There will be way too many people on the sidelines, and when that happens, only bad comes of what's going on. And so we are fighting for the life of our country. We are fighting for our future. And so the more you can help, I will do anything. I never charge when I go places. If I can be there and help you in any kind of an important way, I will do it. But I do feel like we need to join together. This is a great event to wear a button. There's some in the back. Tell people that we can't keep saying higher test scores, more charter schools, more kids off to 4-year college, and think that we're leveling the playing field and preparing kids for life. So you're an awesome audience. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much.